Welcome back to History 374, Plagues and Peoples, Epidemics, Populations, etc. This is the first time I'm doing a recorded lecture where I'm also trying to use the whiteboard behind me, which is going to necessitate some shifting of the camera here. So hope you don't get seasick. Usually when I'm using the whiteboard, you're not going to be able to see me, but I figured that's probably a plus, right? You don't need to see me that much, right? Okay. This is going to be a short, I don't know, 15 or so minutes, if I get to it here, to talk about just some concepts, things that are going to come up again and again throughout the semester. And you're going to find in the first readings this week, certainly in the Porter book. All right? Rory Porter, The Greatest Benefit to Mankind, A Medical History of Humanity. Rory Porter being British, one of the most noted historians of medicine, certainly in the West. So, very knowledgeable guy. Pretty good book. I think it's a little dated. It's from the 2000s, or about, originally published in 97. So I think some of his examples are going to be a little bit dated, but hey, we're historians, right? Anyway, but frankly, still worthwhile, I think. Also, the fact it's a little dated means it's cheaper for you. Okay. All right. So we're going to talk, as I said, just some concepts here: medicine, health and illness, disease, and so on. Let's start with concepts of medicine. I'm going to tilt this down so you can hopefully see that screen a little bit here. All right. So, the question is, what do we mean? I'm going to move this also so we can get a little screen there. There we go. Okay. So we're talking about medicine. In addition to my problems with technology, you'll also find I have horrible handwriting. Okay, that's just the way it goes. I could have been a doctor. Yeah, I know I should have. Anyway, all right. What do we mean by medicine? Typically, what Porter is talking about most of the time is Western medicine. And I'll write a little larger, hopefully, so you can see this. There we go, Western medicine, right? We will talk about some other comparative examples. We're going to talk about the Islamic world. We're going to talk a little bit about China, India, and so on. But as comparatives, most of the time we're focusing on the rise of Western medicine, all right? Western medicine, also known as allopathic medicine. And I think what you're going to see is, as he traces it out, is it's history. So it's got change over time, right? Ideas of medical care and so on have changed over time. But I think one point he makes in this section, which is very important, is that Western medicine is like Western society. And of course, all medical ideas derive out of the societies they're from. But it's based very much on the self. Okay, you go to the doctor and it's about treating you and your body and what's going on and things like that. But there's very much the focus on the individual. And if anything else, we saw this, I think, with COVID, right? Everybody's like, you can't do that to my body. I'm the idea of the autonomous self, right? Well, that's fine to a point, but that's comes in conflict sometimes with the broader issues of health, right? When we're looking at issues of health and healthcare as opposed to medicine per se. Okay, medical care is what you go to the doctor for, right? Healthcare can be much broader. And of course, starting in late 19th century, pretty much, then we started getting into the growth of the public health movement, which moved beyond medical care and, of course, created all sorts of battles between these different groups of professionals. And the doctors didn't like losing out their power. But public health, as we've seen once again in the last couple of years, can mean a lot of different things. It can mean vaccinations, for which the medical establishment is usually involved. But it could mean other things too, right? It can mean masking. It can mean sanitation. It can mean a lot of different things like that that really are kind of outside the control of the medical establishment and aren't really part of the core of medical thinking. Anyway, so these are just some of the concepts there. Let's move on to health and healthcare then, if I can successfully erase this. All right, so what's our second point? The second point is about health and illness, okay? I did red. I'm gonna switch to blue for this one. Okay. Okay, health and illness. Something of a dichotomy, right? You're healthy or you're sick. Well, maybe. What do we mean by these things? What does health mean? What does it mean to be healthy, right? I think that this is very much dependent on your expectations, who you are, where you live, your society, of course, for us as historians, your time and place, right? I'm going to take a drink of water here. Been eating peanut butter. Porter starts by talking about advances in health, which he illustrates by looking at life expectancy. Well, that's not really the same thing, is it? You can't presume just because you live longer that you're healthy. I'll give you a personal example right now. My father is 88, okay? And he's still alive. Sort of. He actually just got out of the hospital. He's in a rehab unit now. But he can't walk. He's confined to a wheelchair. He's got dementia. Has had a long life expectancy, but not necessarily health. Okay? So, all respect to Porter here, they're not necessarily the same thing here. And lack of health is not always necessarily about illness, right? We're going to be focusing a lot about disease and illness. I'll talk about disease in just a minute here. But you can have health or lack of health. You can be unhealthy and not necessarily sick, right? Whether you have, chronic underlying conditions of various sorts, whether it be heart disease or kidney disease or diabetes or something like that. It's not a sickness in the sense that we're going to be looking at, where most of the time when we're looking at illness in this class, we're looking at contagious or infectious disease, a very specific type of concept here. Anyway, so what Porter has to say in those first few pages, yes, there have been tremendous advances in medicine and medical care. The debate is whether that has necessarily led to advances in health. Conversely, some of the greatest advances in health are not necessarily due to medical care. Okay? We see this in a lot of places. I myself focus on the history of Africa. Look at the country of Gambia. Right? In 1960, life expectancy was 32 years. Okay? 30 years later, that had doubled. That's an incredible increase. Double your life expectancy. Of course, you're starting pretty low at 32 years, right? But they doubled it. Almost all of that increase, though, is not due to medical care per se. It's almost all preventive medicine, okay? Prevention, really vaccinations and public health, okay? That's really the great majority of it. So so Porter's going to focus a lot on medicine here and how medicine has changed and how medicine responds to these epidemics and so on that we're going to look at. But we're also interested in how society responds to things. And that's not always the same thing as how the medical community responds, right? Okay, all right. My final one here. Draw off my board in between. All right, final one here is to talk about disease, dis-ease, right? Yeah, you're not at ease. Once again, we're going to talk about various diseases, and most of the time we're going to approach them from the Western medical perspective, okay? And the Western medical perspective says, what is a disease? A disease is a set of symptoms, right? Usually caused by a specific, causative organism. Okay, hope you can see that. I'm going to bend this down a little bit. All right, disease. You got a causative organism involved, right? And then it leads to, my board's shifting. Oh, my board fell apart here. We're going to have to go without it here. No, you can still see it down there. Okay. Fell off the books I had it on. Ironically, a book on smallpox. Okay. Disease, causative organism, defined by a set of symptoms, right? Okay. But as we know, or you probably suspect at this point, or I'll tell you anyway, disease is obviously much more than that. I mean, a lot of historians and social scientists, especially in the last 20 years, have started to analyze disease not in this medical sort of way, but as a social construction, okay? Disease is what we think about it. It's how we respond to it. It's how we feel about it, is really what makes it a certain disease. We define diseases in certain ways. Is it sexually transmitted? Is it not? This is something that's going on right now with monkeypox, right? We got monkeypox breaking out. And what is this disease? Well, it's a skin disease, right? But then, there's these battles among certain communities about whether or not it should be defined as a sexually transmitted disease. Because sometimes people are getting it during sex. Does that make it an STD? Why does it matter? Well, because how we define and describe certain things does have an impact on how we respond to them, and that's what's really important when we talk about a social construction of disease. It's about how we think about it. Now, if you are a follower of Western medicine, you would say, "Oh, social construction doesn't matter. We got the organism. You get the organism. You get the symptoms. You got the disease. That's it." But as we'll see, it's more complicated than that, right? It's about how a community and society responds to all of these things. Now, one other point just about diseases here is different terms, and I don't think Porter actually defines these. He talks at one point, once again without much explanation, about endemic disease. What's endemic disease? Endemic disease is a disease basically which is established within a population. All right? And it's established in a population pretty much at a stable rate, and it's there for long term. He gives the example of malaria would be an endemic disease, especially most places in Africa I've been. Okay, malaria is there. You could look at in the U.S. South before the 30s, and you could say hookworm. Okay, a lot of parasitic diseases are endemic diseases. They're not killing off vast numbers of people like an epidemic would. It's kind of stationary. There's something of a balance between the disease and organism, causative organism, and the population that it's in. Because of course, if it killed off a lot of people, it wouldn't have the hosts around to survive. Anyway, so that's endemic disease. An epidemic is different. That's usually when a disease is spreading, and it's usually defined as the rate of spread. Okay, so that's usually when a disease is spreading within a community, and then kind of one step further than that is pandemic, and that's usually spreading between communities in our modern world now, nation state world, between different countries. Okay, usually with the presumption that it's out of control. All right. Okay. So we have disease defined as a set of symptoms or progress caused by a specific organism. Um, could be a bacteria, could be a virus, it could be a parasite. Um, but then also we'll have to take a look at what the social construction, as I said, what this, what the feelings and thoughts and so on about a disease are. Leprosy would be another example of something that feelings are much more than about the medical side of it. Okay, that's kind of what I wanted to talk about, just to give you an introduction there. Read through your Porter here, and then we'll be ready for Camus. And Porter is fairly quick. You can skim some parts of it, but you should get a jump on Camus because there's about 185 pages of it for next week. Okay, goes quickly. It's a novel, but still, there's a chunk of it there. All right. Thank you very much. See you next week.